the assumptions made by many people of what life was like back then. And when back then is, well, let's try 3000 BC, is very tainted. It's very odd, and we're looking at it through a huge thing that I would call jumps of civilization. We almost never think about the day to day lives of the people who lived in history, but instead look at them as these giant revolutions where you have one king to the next. Usually that's about as small as people want to travel from one king to the next or one era to the next. But we must not forget that people lived second by second, minute by minute, and they breathed in and out like the rest of us. And during this time, when they were breathing in and out, a lot of people lived at the exact same time. Certain pharaohs lived at the same time as other people in Africa were figuring out other things. Other people in the Americas were practicing democracy. Some people don't know that even the Aztecs, to some degree, had a form of democracy before they became the Aztecs and started practicing kingship and abandoning that. We always believe that democracy goes, you have kings and then you develop democracy. They, like that president said, or not president, that founding father said, he had not never seen a native that didn't have or didn't live in a society that could be called a republic. This went throughout the entire continents. So we got the Egyptians living, we've got the Native Americans living, we have the Africans living, we have the Europeans living, and the Asians living at the exact same time, some completely unaware of each other's existence. It's funny that some of the Africans, let's say Khoisan people, were completely unaware when they were painting some of their oldest paintings, 4000 BC paintings, and you compare it to what they were doing in ancient Egypt, and those people had no idea of the Khoisan people living down below. And so, what they were considering the world, they weren't even fully informed about the world and what it looked like. But if we take a step back even further, maybe 30,000 years before this time, we will see that there's something deeper and stronger than this. Svante Pabo once made a video that talked about the Neanderthals. He and his people once didn't believe that Neanderthals fused with human beings. But then when they did the genetic studies, after tracing the DNA of the Neanderthals, they realized that most humans outside of Africa had it. In fact, all humans outside of Africa had it. Some in Africa also had it, like the Ethiopians, at a lesser rate than those outside of Africa. But then DNA studies started taking place in Africa, and African Americans tracing their DNA and finding out exactly what happened. Something odd happened, which is some DNA that was found in African Americans was not found in some Africans, which was really strange. Eventually, they realized that it was an archaic human, and again, they found more and more. This helped them trace and realize that they were archaic humans living amongst human beings, and that human beings themselves are probably a mixture of multiple species of hominids. This is scary because this would have been considered completely nonsensical in the past. For the most part, we're Homo sapien, but every now and then there was something that joined into our species, not the whole batch, but only part of the people. In West Africa, there's some, and it's not even the entire West Africa. That's why you can trace it to specific African Americans and not all of them. If you go down to South Africa, you find many caves, and these caves were occupied by humans, but they were also occupied by non humans, hominids like Homo naledi, that basically did some of the stuff that we did. Where did they go? Why did they run away? Why did they get out of here? Some of them, we think, just ran their course. They ran out of steam and died. Others fused with us, and because there was probably more of us than them, we ate their lunch and destroyed them completely. Others, we fused with them, and they became us in a way. And some of the diseases we have today, we could probably thank them. But why? Why would humans, the things that we have today, who seem so discriminatory towards our own species, why would we fuse with stuff like Neanderthals, stuff like hominids that just are found anywhere, or these ghost species, which people call them ghost species because we don't have skeletons for them. We found them using DNA. Isn't that scary? There's a whole race of people that we have no skeletons for, that we thought didn't even exist until we did DNA tests. Before you consider how scary that is, think about the fact that we don't know if they were able to speak or not. And if they spoke, did they have a deep voice, a soft voice, a high voice? All we know about them is that they're in our DNA. How much of that could have been the result of, let's just say, unwilling participants being dominated by a super species known as human beings? And also, what do they look like? Something that I don't like, and I see this all the time, is whenever they make archaic humans, they make them look like Europeans, probably because they want to give this idea that we go from archaic human to European. This is terrible, terrible. We know that all archaic humans at some point started from Africa. Even Neanderthals, which are not found in Africa, started from a pre Neanderthal person, which they shared with something called the Denisovans and something called the Homo, I forgot its name, Australopithecus. It's a species of little people found in Australia. Some people think that these people, as a group, collective, were some of the earliest to migrate out of Africa and then formed completely different species, meaning they might have left millions of years ago, but then somehow we just chopped them off or fused with them. But let's go back to the ones that are found in Africa. I know some people don't like Wikipedia, but we're gonna look up from Wikipedia for a second because it's got I double checked it. It's got some of the most accurate information of multiple things in one place. Ancient DNA data from A 4500 BP, Ethiopian highland individuals, and from southern 2300 to 1300 BP, and eastern and southern central Africa has clarified that some West African populations have small amounts of excess alleles, best explained by an archaic source in West Africans that is not included in pre-agricultural Eastern Africans, hunter-gatherers, Southern African hunter-gatherer populations, or the genetic graduation between them. The West African groups carrying the archaic DNA include Yoruba from coastal Nigeria and Mende from Sierra Leone, indicating that the ancient DNA was acquired long before the spread of agriculture and likely well before the Holocene, starting 1100-600 BP. Such an archaic lineage must have separated before the divergence of the San ancestor, which is estimated to have begun on the order of 200 to 300,000 years ago.
The hypothesis that has been archaic line in the ancestry of present day Africans that originated before the San, Pygmies, and East African hunter gatherers and the Eurasians is supported by a line of evidence dependent from the Skogland findings based on long haplotypes with deep divergence from other human haplotype including that word Lachance et al. 2012, Hammer et al. 2011, and Plagnall and Wall 2006. In the archaic DNA differences found by Hammer et al., the Pygmies of Central Africa are grouped with the San, in contrast to the Yoruba. Further clarification of the presence of the archaic DNA in current West African populations with the extraction and sequencing of DNA from 4 fossils found at Shum Laka in Cameroon, dating from 8,000 to 3,000 BP. These individuals were found to derive most of their DNA from Central African hunter gatherers and did not share the archaic DNA found in the Yoruba and Mende. The pattern of differences between eastern, central, and southern hunter gatherers, when compared to the West African groups which had been found by Hammer, was confirmed. In a second study, Lipson et al. Studied DNA extracted from 6 additional eastern and south central African fossils from the last 18,000 years. It was determined that their genetic origins could be accounted for by DNA contributions from southern, central, eastern hunter gatherers, and that none of them had the archaic DNA found in the Yoruba. According to a study published in 2020, there are indications that 2 to 19%, or about 6.6 and 7% of the DNA of 4 West African populations may have come from an archaic hominin, which split from the ancestors of humans and Neanderthals between 360,000 years ago to 1.8 million years ago. However, in contrast to the study of Skogland and Lipson with ancient African DNA, the study also finds that at least part of this proposed archaic admixture is also present in Eurasians, non Africans, and that the admixture events range from 0 to 124,000 years BP. 124,000 years BP, which includes the period before the out of Africa migration and prior to the Africa Eurasia split, thus affecting in part the common ancestors of both Africans and Eurasians non Africans. Another recent study, which discovered substantial amounts of previously undescribed human genetic variation, also found ancestral genetic variation in Africans that predates modern humans and was lost in most non Africans.
Cowrie shells. Most of us, when we see them, we think, not that special, just a shell, right? Well, these cowrie shells were used by most humans around the world as money before money was invented, before gold, before diamonds, before paper money, before all that symbolism we see throughout every continent. For some reason, these cowrie shells being used as a sort of money being traded from one place to another. This helped us understand that there isn't a full isolation in the history of Africa between North Africa and Southern Africa, because we find cowrie shells being used in Southern Africa to trade in between the people, and then we find these same cowrie shells all the way up in North Africa being used in the same way. Some people suggest that this means that there was large trade networks that maybe weren't as fast as what we think of today, but would eventually get up there. Because of this ubiquity of characterization between these different people, the Ojibwe, the Yoruba, the ancient Egyptians, the Khoisan, and other peoples around the world in India, and even the Arabians, using these cowrie shells. They've been deemed or termed shell money. It's not a word that everyone agrees with, but it's probably the best word to describe this, much like the word democracy. We don't know exactly what it is, but we've got a loose term for it, so let's go with it. The shell money helps us understand that these species must have been at least somewhat developed enough to understand symbolism.